Sunny South Florida, across Miami-Dade, Broward, and Monroe counties, the Esserman family and Knight Foundation have come together to recognize local journalism. South Floridians indicated the stories they valued most last year by nominating over 60 local reporters who have served and informed their community. Tonight, we celebrate the best in public service journalism. Live from Telemundo Center, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome your host of the 2021 Esserman Knight Journalism Awards, NBC6 South Florida news anchor and two-time Emmy nominee, Constance Jones.
Good evening and welcome to the 2021 Esserman Knight Journalism Awards. Now, 2020 was a year of loss and anxiety as we faced our first global pandemic in over a century. Now, this was the year that we turned to local news as our lifeline. Our journalists have risked their own safety to bring you news like how to get vaccinated, how to work remotely, or support small businesses. It is public service journalism that we're honoring here tonight. Now, this is the award's second year, but the first time nominations were accepted from the community. In fact, we received 61 nominations from teachers, activists, and civil leaders. Now, out of those nominations, 14 finalists were selected for their work, including behind-the-scenes look at our hospital's COVID units, a series on Black officers during all the protests, and many more insightful investigations. Now, tonight, we honor our winners. You're invited to join the conversation on social media using the hashtag Esserman Knight Awards. Now, I'm delighted to introduce you to Charlene Esserman and Knight's Foundation President Alberto Ibargüen to tell you more about these awards.
Thank you, Constance. I'm Alberto Ibargüen from Knight Foundation. This is my colleague, Charlene Esserman, representing the Esserman family. We are delighted, both of us, to welcome you to the Esserman Knight Journalism Awards for 2021. This is a really very special program at a particularly important time for local journalism, which has been so stressed, but which as you will see tonight, is still delivering the goods for South Florida. It's a wonderful thing that Ron and Charlene Esserman decided to recognize the continuing importance of journalism as part of the democracy, and in particular, the importance of that kind of journalism here in their hometown of Miami and South Florida. This is the wonderful woman who invented it, Charlene Esserman. Charlene, would you welcome our friends?
It's especially gratifying to be able to continue the Esserman Knight Awards for accountability and investigative journalism. My husband, Ron Esserman, who was a visionary, optimist, and generous heart, he envisioned this project for a long time. We both understood that a free press is essential for our democracy. Eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. We also wanted a project that would bring our family together to promote community awareness and public service. This program honors courageous journalists who shed light on issues of injustice, corruption, demand accountability from the powerful, and galvanize all of us to stand up for change. As local journalism is facing huge challenges today, we felt this endeavor was crucial. Celebrating high-quality journalism keeps the fire of freedom burning and ensures that a free press will survive and thrive. We join with the Knight Foundation because they also celebrate and honor our same values of social justice, equality, and intellectual freedom. This endowment has helped the Knight Foundation to promote the work of outstanding journalists who conduct exhaustive and meticulous research, who sacrifice and take risks to shine a harsh light where truth needs to be exposed.
We welcome everyone to the program. We hope that you'll find ways that you can support your local news sources. It doesn't matter what they are. At this point, we would just simply want you to cheer on local news and welcome to the program. And with that, we'll send it back to you, Constance.
All right, thank you both for shining a light on the importance of quality journalism here in South Florida. Now, before we celebrate our local reporters, we want to take a moment to honor a national journalist who has championed these very same values. Our honoree tonight actually got her start here in South Florida's West Side Gazette and has brought the values of local journalism to the forefront with her reporting on the national stage. We are so proud to have a Miami native in the White House asking those tough questions and representing the voices of communities across the nation. Congratulations, Yamiche Alcindor.
Recently named moderator of PBS's Washington Week, Yamiche Alcindor is one of the most respected voices in journalism. Alcindor is the White House correspondent for PBS NewsHour and a contributor to NBC News and MSNBC. She was an aggressive voice for truth and clarity throughout the Trump administration and has continued to bring perspective and insight to big stories ranging from the coronavirus pandemic to the Black Lives Matter movement. Congratulations to the Esserman Knight Excellence in Journalism Award honoree, Yamiche Alcindor. Several months ago, when Yamiche Alcindor was nominated for the 2021 Esserman Knight Journalism Excellence Award, the Esserman family immediately encouraged the opportunity to honor such a distinguished media figure who has so many local South Florida ties. Her newly begun assignment as moderator of Washington Week is only the latest evidence of her tremendous journalistic ability. Yamiche truly embodies and defends the values of independent journalists everywhere. As trust in media has declined, she has provided a textbook example of how to build back that trust and how new generations can advance value-based journalism in the newsroom. Yamiche, congratulations on receiving the 2021 Esserman Knight Excellence Award, and thanks for being with us here tonight.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction. I am so touched to be here with you. I want to say thank you so much for recognizing me with the Esserman Knight Excellence in Journalism Award for Distinguished Service. I am so honored also to receive this award and to join the great Marty Barron, who received the inaugural award last year. I'm also honored because I'm receiving this award amid a sea of journalists who are doing such incredible reporting around the world and at the White House. I got into journalism after being inspired by the stories of civil rights journalists who pushed to hold American political leaders accountable in the 1950s and 60s. And I'm blessed that in that same vein, in that same legacy, that I've had the opportunity and continue to have the opportunity to hold presidents and political leaders accountable, both as a White House correspondent for PBS NewsHour, but now as the anchor of Washington Week on PBS. Over the last year, our nation has faced so many challenges that have underscored the need for a clear-eyed, dogged press. And millions of people in our nation are mourning the loss of a loved one, a family member, a friend, a neighbor in the wake of the coronavirus pandemic that has torn through communities and killed hundreds of thousands of people, many of them disproportionately Black and people of color. Millions of people have also had to face the deathly consequences of systemic racism. And as a result, our country and our nation is going through a racial reckoning, and the death and after the murder of George Floyd and the death of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and so many others. So we're doing all that while still processing the siege of the Capitol and that 2020 election lie that it was rigged when it was not. So really, to receive this award right now, it's a reminder of just how much journalists have to continue to push for truth. And it's inspiring, and I'm very grateful for it. So thank you again for this award.
Terrific. We really are very proud to have you as the second winner. The first winner, as you said, was Marty Barron, who is a trustee of Knight Foundation. He also happens to be the editor of was the editor of the Washington Post. He said at one time, when he was accused of being a partisan and at war with the administration, he said, "We're not at war, we're at work." How do you feel about that? You've been accused of being a foe of the administration and of not being a friend of the people that you're interviewing. How do you feel about that when they say, "Why are you at war with me?"
I think Marty Barron put it really, really perfectly, which is, I'm not at war, I'm at work, and I am doing the work of the American people. I remind people all the time that journalism is in the Constitution, that at the beginning of the framing of this flawed but great nation, we saw a putting together of a democracy, and that democracy had to have a free press in it because people need to be held accountable. And that means that Democrats and Republicans and everyone in between, that journalists should be asking tough questions. We should also be, in my mind, I'm constantly thinking about vulnerable populations and people who will never make it into the White House. And last year, especially as we were going through a pandemic and so many people were fearing for their lives, so many Americans dying of a pandemic, we had a president that was routinely lying to the American people, who was downplaying the pandemic, and he needed to be really pushed on his answers and his solutions for this country. And I'm proud of the work that we did, and I'm proud of the work that so many other journalists did, going into emergency rooms, interviewing first responders, explaining to people just how bad this pandemic was and who was really the most hardest hit when you think about all that our country lost and went through.
As a result of all that work, you ended up as the moderator of the longest running show, or one of the longest running shows on television, it comes at a really interesting time of personal identification of reporters, of identity politics, of reporters as having their own brand. And yet you've chosen to lead something that is so institutional, so traditional. Tell us about what are you thinking? What are you feeling? Where are you taking this?
Well, I should tell you, I'm so incredibly excited and just over the moon at the idea that I'm now moderating Washington Week on PBS. It's a storied show. It has a great legacy, and it's a legacy that I hope to build and expand on. So I think, yes, it's traditional. I am someone who came up from the West Side Gazette, a weekly newspaper, African-American newspaper in South Florida, and then went to the Miami Herald, the New York Times, and other institutional papers like USA Today. And then, of course, I landed at the NewsHour. So for me, part of my career has been being at these storied, great traditional places, but also bringing in the fresh perspective that I bring as a millennial, as a Black woman, as a Haitian American, as a South Floridian. So for me, Washington Week, it's an incredible time to be taking the helm of it, because we can do so much with the show. We can make it fresh. We can bring on new voices. We can think of specials and take it on the road. There's so many different things that we can do with the show. But I love the fact that we have this loyal viewer base that has been watching the show for decades and that understands the DNA of the show. And the DNA of the show is really explaining power and politics to everyday people. And that, to me, is the core of my journalism, and it has been for a long time. So for me, this is a natural fit. And I should say, of course, I'm taking over this show from Bob Costa, who did an amazing job moderating the show during a really tumultuous time in American politics. And of course, I'm doing it also after a longtime host, my mentor, one of my mentors, Glenna Milberg, hosted the show. She's someone who I think about often, and it's in some ways surreal that I'm now sitting in the chair that she sat in for more than 2 decades. And it's just touching to me to have this opportunity.
As you know, one of the things the Knight Foundation focuses on is precisely the disappearing local news. As you go around the country, how do you bring that into the national perspective? Locally, people be able to associate themselves with that national story, and that there be a respect for the local story as well.
That's right. And local news is so near and dear to my heart, because I started in local news, right? I would not be where I am if there weren't local newspapers in my neighborhood. A weekly African-American newspaper, West Side Gazette, didn't take a chance on a 16-year-old who told them that they were interested in journalism. That was me. That's how I got started. The Miami Herald, being able to say to a high school student at the time, I was in high school when I interned at the Miami Herald the first time, come on in, we'll teach you journalism. And to me, the local journalism is so much about explaining to people where their money's going, explaining to people how their city is functioning, holding city officials accountable that maybe people aren't really paying attention to. So I think the first thing I do is talk about that, remind people that I am very much a product of local news, and that you need to be really supporting your local newspaper. So I'm subscribed to the Washington Post, to the Miami Herald, to the Sun Sentinel. And I tell people that because it's really important that they do the same, because local news is where you will find out if your city council member or your mayor is not doing the right thing. And that in some ways can be more impactful, or just as impactful as what happens in DC. And the second thing I do is to really, I think, especially through Washington Week, I'm excited to bring on local reporters, even if it's for a segment or an extra, or maybe it's for the whole show, to talk about what's going on. I think about Georgia. I have a good friend named Blaine Alexander who's doing reporting for NBC in Georgia. Her beat, Georgia, has been at the center of almost every single kind of month phase of the last year, whether it was coronavirus, whether it was the police shootings, whether it was the Senate race. There were so many things going on in the states that we need to highlight. And then there are also really good stories. I just read a really good story about a local paper, local media organization in Pittsburgh that is constantly reminding people about January 6th, constantly reminding people which elected officials voted not to certify the election, and the work that local news stations are doing to keep it to keep it fresh in people's minds that our democracy was almost our democracy was attacked, but also our democracy was almost undone by a group of people who stormed the U.S. Capitol. That was local journalism doing that work. So for me, it's also highlighting that and finding a way now that I have a show to bring those people on and to hear those voices.
I think you were doing that even before you had your own show, but now we're really going to see what you can do. Congratulations, Yamiche, on winning the Esserman Knight 2021 Excellence in Journalism Award. The Essermans are proud. If the Knights were still around, they would be proud. All of South Florida is proud of their native daughter. We look forward to seeing you on Washington Week. And once again, congratulations.
Thank you so much.
And thank you so much, Alberto and Yamiche. We'd like to welcome Jose Diaz-Balar's anchor of Noticias Telemundo and also NBC Nightly News Saturday to share some welcoming remarks.
So nice to see you. Good evening. On behalf of Noticias Telemundo, welcome to Telemundo Center. It is a real pleasure. It's actually an honor to be here with you tonight. We are so excited to be hosting this year's, Esserman Knight Journalism Awards. Here in South Florida, we're fortunate to be home to an incredibly talented group of journalists. And today, we're here to celebrate some of them. The Esserman Knight Journalism Awards recognize the groundbreaking journalism being done in this region. The last year, has challenged all of us personally as well as professionally. Rising to meet those challenges, this year's winners produced exceptional work with profound impact, the essence of exemplary public service journalism. So from everyone here at Noticias Telemundo, we want to congratulate tonight's winners. And thank you to the Esserman family and the Knight Foundation for your commitment to local journalism. Also, thank you to each and every one of my colleagues watching tonight for all the great work you do day in and day out.
All right, thank you, Jose. And a special thanks, of course, to the Telemundo Center for hosting the event tonight. And now it's time to present the Honorable Mention Awards. Each of these recipients are veteran South Florida reporters who did an outstanding job with investigative work in 2020.
Miami Herald reporter Jacqueline Charles is honored for her consistently excellent coverage of Miami's Haitian American community. For more than a decade, she has humanized the face of tragedy and hope, both here and on the island, offering readers deep insight into social and political developments. Dan Christensen founded and leads the Florida Bulldog, a nonprofit investigative journalism site. Last year, he covered a startling secret that Broward Sheriff Gregory Toney, head of Parkland's shooting investigation, had been arrested and charged with murder after he shot and killed a man during his adolescence. And finally, a team from the South Florida Sun-Sentinel dug deep into the state of Florida's official narrative on COVID-19 and found some deeply disturbing problems, including the Governor Ron DeSantis' efforts at suppressed information on the pandemic. Congratulations to our honorable mention honorees, each of whom have served the community through their bold reporting.
Congratulations to Jackie, Dan, Cindy, Mario, and David. And now for our second place winner, who needs no introduction to South Florida. We're talking about Glenna Milberg, reporter for WPLG Local 10 News and co-host for This Week in South Florida. Glenna, along with executive producer Natalie Moreira, along with photojournalist Mario Alonso, are honored tonight for their series, The Shill Scheme, an investigation into the political con that actually changed the outcome of a local election in 2020.
After investigation into the State Senate District 37 race, Glenna Milberg discovered that Alex Rodriguez was a decoy candidate, existing only to take votes away from the Democratic candidate, Senator Jose Javier Rodriguez, who lost by just 34 votes. For their work in uncovering foul play with the Shill Scheme, the second place award goes to Glenna Milberg, Natalie Moreira de Varona, and Mario Alonso of WPLG Local 10 News.
All right, thank you so much for joining us tonight, Glenna. Really appreciate it.
It's so great to see you.
It's so good for you guys who don't know, Glenna and I worked together for 9 years at Channel 10 News, so it's such an honor to be on the stage with you.
All mine. And I'm so honored to have been honored by the Esserman Knights. I mean, it's just, they elevate South Florida journalism in such a way. So this is such a great night for everybody.
It is. And, you know, Glenna, we spoke on the phone earlier this week, and everyone really wants to know how this story came to be. And when I asked you, I said, how on earth did you find this out? And you said there was something kind of suspicious with one of the candidates during election season. It was
kind of a real fluke in a way, because we at Local 10 News, we do a program to get everybody ready for the elections in November. And we were doing a half an hour, and Natalie Moreira de Varona, that you mentioned, our producer, was making graphics and couldn't find photographs for a couple of candidates. And we thought, what candidate won't want their photos? No internet footprint. It was so strange. And I put it in the back of my mind, all right, let's check this out. Went on with life for a couple of weeks. And then one day I had some time and we started looking into the campaign finance, campaign records of these particular people. And because the moment was looking into all of them at the same time, the patterns of how similar they were in our faces. And right down from the pattern of their email addresses, the dates they filed, and then we find in campaign finance, their donors and their expenditures were identical.
My goodness, yeah.
And then we went and knocked on their doors, and they were there. And that was the catalyst for everything.
And that really was kind of the golden nugget, like the golden ticket when you got that face-to-face encounter with Alex Rodriguez. Tell us about that, how that was.
We didn't know it was him, and he lied about being him at first. And we had no reason to think he was lying because I didn't know what he looked like. But he talked in third person about Alex. Oh, he'll be back. And why would he run for state senator? First time, out of the box, no political past. And when we aired the whole story and used this this was his coworker, his boss, purportedly, someone called me that night and said, oh no, that was him. And I said, really, prove it. And they did.
Wow.
And that's kind of how that started. There's another district where there was a shill candidate named Celso Alfonso, who's 81 years old. Maybe he's watching tonight. He is not arrested or charged like Alex Rodriguez is. But when we went to his door, he kind of lied at first and then came to start talking about what a dream it was to run for Senate. And I asked who made his flyers, and he said he didn't have any flyers. I said, well, yeah, here's your flyers, and here's who paid for them. Oh, yeah. So I'm unclear to this day what they thought about what they were getting into. For whomever got them into it.
So speaking of that, do we know who was behind these shill candidates?
Well, there are a lot of reporters in South Florida who are following this story, and the amazing reporters at the Herald, some of whom you will meet tonight. Some people at the Herald had a wonderful story about former state senator Frank Artiles bragging about it. So then the focus became on him. He has been arrested and charged with campaign finance violations. But the money is really what's behind it. And the money trail in the campaign finance records are in PACs, identical expenditures. And the PACs are dark money. And because that is completely legal in the state of Florida, the trail stops for someone like me who does not have subpoena power. I know this Miami-Dade State Attorney's Office is investigating. That office does have subpoena power. We may find out who's behind it. But former Senator Frank Artiles is certainly charged with playing a role, right down to having a safe in his house where he handed Alex Rodriguez cash, which is not legal, which is why he's now facing charges.
All right, we're running out of time, but
a chronic problem in our job.
It is a chronic problem, and this is such an interesting series of stories.
Thank you.
Obviously, this went all the way up to Tallahassee, lawmakers making some changes. Can you talk about that?
They made some changes, but I don't know that they made enough changes to stop this from happening. The only change, there is an election law that fixes problems Florida did not have. But in that law, some Democrats managed to put in an amendment that a candidate for an office who wants to run as a no-party affiliation has to be a no-party affiliation if they're going to change from Democrat or Republican for a year, because both of these shills were Republican registered voters who changed and then the next day entered the race as NPA, no party affiliation. So that amendment is in there. That might stop something, but it's still very legal to place a shill candidate in a Florida race. And I will say what we've learned, as just to wrap this up in a bow, that no matter what happens, it's the voters who really need to be aware, do their homework, know the candidate that they're voting for, because, Constance, if they had known and had done their homework, 6,300 and some odd people would never have voted for a candidate that never campaigned, that they couldn't know even was a candidate.
Wow. Well, fantastic work. And for a lot of folks who don't know TV news, you're feeding the monster every day. So it's hard to even get investigative work like this done. So I know you spent a lot of your own private time doing this good work.
We did. And I will say our management, our news director, our general manager are so behind work like this.
Yeah.
And we try to do it as best we can, whenever we can.
All right.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Glenna. All right. Well, it is so inspiring to hear about how investigative journalism has the power to change laws, like we heard with Glenna's story. That's why the Esserman family has decided to create an annual investigative journalism fellowship for early career reporters. Now, the first recipient was Christina St. Louis, a South Florida native and graduate of Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism, where she's a fellow at the Tony Stable Center of Investigative Journalism. Now, Christina is a crime justice investigative reporter with the Esserman Investigative Reporting Fellowship at the Miami Herald. Her groundbreaking reports on police violence and prison injustice in South Florida has proven to make a great asset to the team at the Herald. Let's take a minute to meet Christina and learn more about the work that she's doing for our community.
My name is Christina St. Louis, and I am the 2020 recipient of the Esserman Fellowship for an Investigative Reporter, and I spent the year at the Miami Herald. Besides coronavirus, I reported on politics, the political campaigns that had to do with the election. One that sticks out is one that I did with 7 other reporters, and we covered how the Trump campaign in 2016 tried to deter Black voters in Miami from voting in the election. But one of the stories that still sticks out to me is a story I did about a man named Michael Hamilton. And Mr. Hamilton is someone who lived in Liberty City in his family home, his childhood home. But because the city of Miami found his house to be an unsafe structure, they demolished his home at the time that he was living in it, which left him homeless at a time when people in the state of Florida were supposed to be protected from evictions. That story will always be a testament to how important it is to report on our local community. I'm incredibly grateful for this opportunity, and I have no doubt that the skills that I learned will continue to help me report stories that are essential to the community. Thank you for your generosity and this opportunity.
Now, this fellowship is a wonderful way to strengthen our community and support emerging journalists. Well, now it is my pleasure to announce our first place winners. Both winners showed incredible tenacity in lifting the veil of 2 notoriously secretive entities, Immigration and Customs Enforcement and the cruise industry. We'll speak with both of them in just a few moments. But if you have any questions for our winners, use social media. Use the hashtag Esserman Knight Awards. Now, first, we recognize the Miami Herald team for their work on COVID cruises, which was led by tourism reporter Taylor Dolven.
Taylor Dolven led a team of reporters who revealed the extent of COVID cases on cruise ships at a time when many executives and elected officials claimed there were few. The team published a database of outbreaks, finding that over 3,900 COVID cases and 111 deaths were linked to cruise ships. Their work paved the way to safety for crew members and passengers alike. Congratulations to the investigative team from the Miami Herald for winning the Esserman Knight First Place Team Award.
Well, you know, the team actually created a WhatsApp newsletter that served for crew members as their only link to news from the outside world. Now, that is public service journalism. Congratulations to the COVID cruise team. And then finally, let's meet our second first place winner, Monique Madan, whose stories the immigration pandemic played a role in exposing the U.S. Department of Homeland Security in the beginning stages of the pandemic.
Monique Madan told the stories of ICE detainees as the pandemic raged through South Florida. Her reporting was cited in a federal lawsuit filed to obtain the release of detainees at 3 South Florida detention centers. Madan began working on this series remotely as she herself battled COVID-19 for 52 days and still continued to find ways to reach 370 detainees to tell their stories. For her dedication to serving South Florida, the First Place Individual Award goes to Monique O Madan.
Outstanding work by Monique. Her reporting was cited in a federal lawsuit filed to obtain the release of detainees at 3 South Florida detention centers. And both of our winners created tangible change for their communities, saving lives by exposing the truth. I am just so excited to sit down with the winners to learn about your groundbreaking work, your investigations. Now, remember, if you have any questions for our winners, make sure you go to social media. Right now, we are checking Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. Use the hashtag Esserman Knight Awards. Welcome, Monique and Taylor. Thanks for being here tonight.
Thanks for having us.
All right, so both of you guys really did some amazing work. You both dealt with really secretive, concrete industry. Of course, Taylor, you had the cruise ship industry. Monique, you had ICE. How did you bust open the doors to even start these conversations and do these stories? And I'll start with you, Monique.
Sure. I don't think there's any way to interview 400 people without building trust.
Yeah.
I think for me, it was really being intentional about creating that relationship with whether that person was behind bars or the person not behind bars and allowing me to get there. Mm-hmm. So it was definitely about trust, and it was about being diligent, especially during COVID, you know, being able to use the computer, the cell phone, WhatsApp messages, penetrating Facebook groups. I think all of that compiled together really helped us get into these places where no one has ever been before.
And Taylor, you dealt with big business, these multi-billion-dollar industries. How did you get through there?
Yeah, as you can imagine, they're not big fans of everyone knowing their business.
Yeah.
So, you know, we really wanted to get to these workers that were stuck on these ships. And so the best way to do that was really just to provide the workers the information they needed to be advocating for what was right with these companies. So like you mentioned, we created this newsletter on WhatsApp, and we're able to give, you know, every tip I was getting, I was passing forward to crew members. Every story we wrote went out to them, and it really became like a exchange of information, and we were able to break a lot of stories that way.
All right, and of course, to break stories, you have to have sources, right? And you ladies both spoke to that. And with these particular stories, for people to reveal information, it could be dangerous for them. It could put their lives in jeopardy, their families' lives in jeopardy. Can you speak about that, developing that trust and that rapport?
Sure. I mean, everything's at risk at this point, especially when you're talking about the immigration field. You have people who are at risk of losing their citizenship or their ability to have any chances of staying in this country. They're risking deportation, possible abuse, verbal abuse, physical abuse, solitary confinement. There is so much that's at risk, even time with their families over the phone. I mean, they chose to contact a reporter from the Miami Herald as opposed to talking to mom or dad, sister, brother. So that says a lot about the importance of building those relationships in order to get to the story.
And Taylor?
Yeah, it's strange being celebrated for work that really is rooted in such deep suffering of people. And so, you know, we did our best to be there for them, and to, you know, often we were there really the only person that they were calling in the outside world. For these crew members, you know, they didn't really want to burden family with what was going on. And so we became a real lifeline for them. And
for many people, being a journalist, it's extremely emotional because you get intimately involved with these sources, these characters in the stories. And Taylor, when I was looking through your reports, I mean, there were reports of at least 2 crew members who committed suicide while on those ships. I mean, how taxing and how difficult was it going through that? I'm sure the same as well in those detention centers, really difficult situations.
Yeah, for crew members who were stuck, the biggest thing was just the uncertainty. I think all of us on land faced a certain amount of uncertainty. We didn't know how long we would be working from home. We didn't know if we would lose our jobs tomorrow. But it's a different thing to be stuck at sea and not knowing if or when you're going to see your family again, not knowing if or when you're going to get paid again. And you know, on cruise ships, the supervisors have a lot of control over workers' conditions. And so at least one of my sources had her Wi-Fi taken away. And they really risked a lot to speak with us. And I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah, one of the stories that comes to mind for me is the story about a Cuban detainee who was behind bars for 11 years. And I was able to shadow him for a whole year. And as a result of that reporting, he was set free, right? And it was just this cyclical problem perpetuating in the immigration system that was exposed. And for him, I remember him telling me, you know, I don't have PPE. I think I'm going to die. I thought I was going to die before, but now there's COVID. I'm really actually planning my death. And if this is the last letter you get from me, then so it be. And those conversations were happening very regularly during the pandemic.
And with that story, I mean, finding out his daughter and then connecting the daughter and then I mean, I was crying, like listening to, can you tell us a little bit about that too? Because the story just kept going and going. It was great.
Sure. Yeah. You know, the reporting really did expose a problem in the immigration system. It stems from the criminal justice system. You have someone with a prior criminal record who did his time, gets out of a Florida prison, and after 15 years serving, he steps out and is in the custody of ICE. Yeah. And he thought he was going to end up being deported back to Cuba, but Cuba didn't allow him, didn't want him, didn't accept him. So what happened is that he stayed there for 11 years, almost 12. When we got a hold of him, he was still in the middle of trying to understand why he was in solitary confinement for half that time, why he didn't even know himself. So being able to really dig deep and tell the story and reaching out to his daughter, as you mentioned, asking her, you know, as a reporter, you don't really plan on reunifying families in that sense. But when I called her and I said, hi, I want to talk to you about your dad, she said, he's still alive? Yeah. So that was very, very interesting from the reporter standpoint, being able to connect them. They do have a relationship now. They talk often. He has faced a whole new set of issues. He is now homeless. So it's very much another story,
another series of problems.
Part 3 to come, yeah.
And Taylor, when we also spoke about the problems and the cases being reported, and we all remember this time last year, nobody knew anything. But specifically with the cruise lines, information wasn't getting out there. The Miami Herald decided, hey, we're going to start collecting this data. We're going to start counting these cases and get it out there. What made your team do that?
Yeah, so it was really spurred by, I went to Port Miami the day after the CDC warned everyone to stop cruising. They said it's dangerous. They issued a travel warning, do not get on a cruise ship. And I saw people lined up to board. So I was interviewing passengers, but I was also interviewing crew members. And they were telling me, you know, what virus? And by this point, there were already outbreaks on the Diamond Princess cruise ship in Japan. There was already an outbreak on the Grand Princess cruise ship off the coast of California. And these crew members really didn't know about their risk and weren't being informed. And so we decided, you know, no one's counting this, no one's tracking this. We need to do this. And, you know, for a while, these companies were saying, we're not the problem, we're not unique, you know, this virus isn't exceptionally dangerous on cruise ships. And we were able to link COVID cases to 87 cruise ships through collecting data. My colleagues who worked with me on that project, you know, we pulled from all different kinds of sources, government sources, media sources, interviews with passengers, and we're able to put together the most comprehensive list of COVID cases linked to cruise ships.
Yeah, but when we spoke, you know, you can't just Google and say how many cases are at Royal Caribbean. I mean, not just to simplify it, but the fact that you were actually looking at different registries in other countries to find out how many cases there were. I mean, this was a lot of heavy-duty work to find out these numbers.
Yeah, at this time last year, countries were putting out reports, some of them daily, saying this many cases today. And Australia and Trinidad and Tobago, for example, they would delineate, this is a cruise ship case, this is a cruise ship case. So that made our job really easy. Oftentimes they wouldn't, but you know, local media in these countries would find out or would report it. So we built that way, step by step.
And talking about life, obviously, crew members stuck in their rooms, these detainees stuck in almost a nightmare in facilities that were already pretty rough to start with, right? And now you add this other layer of COVID on it where there's no PPE, there's lack of communication. Talk to us about what life was for those detainees.
I think one of the most vivid scenes that comes to my mind is the scene I paint in one of the stories where one of the detainees tells me, all we have are blankets and God. And I remember when he said that, I said, I need to lead the story with that, because I don't think, for so many years, we don't know what it's like inside immigration facilities.
Yeah.
So to be able to get such detail during a global pandemic was very rare. And I think, the world needed to really understand what was going on inside, and the people really did feel hopeless. They already felt like they have less rights than everybody else. So speaking to a reporter who they felt cared enough to hear their stories was a big part of their day for them. They would listen to the radio and hear all the interviews happening on, WLRN, NPR, and say, we heard you talk about our story, here's something else. And then it started building and building. And how was it like there? I mean, there was no soap, there was no hand sanitizer. There was this thing called cohorting, which we know is when a whole bunch of people, regardless if they're positive or negative for the virus, were being put in one cell all together.
Yeah.
So we were at the forefront of exposing that practice despite CDC guidance. So that was really an important part of the reporting process, but also their families. A lot of their families they're part of this story because their loved one is locked in there. I had one person who said, my family member's missing. And I did a series on that too, where detainees were just going missing. And the family members had no idea where they were, and they were at the local hospitals on ventilators.
Yeah.
So that reporting was especially, they were especially grateful for that story where they found their father, they found their brother, and there were there were 2 deaths that I covered so far. So, not to mention the hundreds and hundreds of cases at the ICE detention centers across the country. Well, in South Florida and thousands across the country.
Across the country. And you had just mentioned soap, and I remember, Taylor, we talked. I didn't know that crew members had to purchase their own toiletries and some of their own items and water during this time, which is, I mean, if you're a worker on a ship, you'd think you'd get soap and water, right?
Yeah, so crew members stopped working because there were no longer passengers boarding. But the company stopped paying them. Some provided a small stipend, but they had to purchase all of their toiletries, all of their soft drinks, other basic necessities. And so you can imagine being really far away from your family, missing rent payments, having to go to your employer to buy basic toiletries. And people just described like a really profound desperation to have their feet on land. That feeling, after you're on a ship, you kind of have, I don't know if there's a word for it, but you feel kind of like you're on the ocean still.
Yeah.
They really just craved, the certainty of having both feet on land. And when they finally did get home and had their feet on land, they just described that as like the most reassuring feeling.
Something else I didn't know about the cruise line industry, I guess we kind of know, most of us know that they're not American companies, so they don't have the same regulations like companies do. They may have their headquarters in Miami, but when they're out in sea, they don't have to follow the same kind of rules that maybe you would have to follow on land. Could you explain that a little bit to us?
Yeah, so cruise companies, the ones you're familiar with, Carnival Corporation, Royal Caribbean Group, Norwegian Cruise Line Holdings, they're all headquartered in Miami. But they're incorporated abroad, and they operate mostly in international waters. So, basic labor rights like we have in this country, like the 40-hour work week, weekends, overtime pay, none of that exists. And so they work really, really long contracts, 9-month contracts away from their families with no days off. They work 7-day weeks. And that really was a huge problem because, as someone who's in month 9 of their contract and the pandemic hits, you had people who were away from their families for a year and a half, stuck. So yeah, it's interesting how it's set up, and I think a lot of crew members are really hopeful that some of that will change.
Monique, what are some of the takeaways that you're hoping your series of reporting, because it was a whole myriad of different things that you brought to light. What are your takeaways that you're hoping will happen moving forward?
Definitely an understanding of the immigration system. I'm hoping, and I've gotten a sense that the community has definitely learned a lot from what's happening behind bars, and definitely a deeper understanding of why this reporting is so important. I think that's the biggest takeaway, that people should really try to understand. This reporting is important because it's bringing change to our community.
And with that, we were talking as journalists, sometimes we work in our own bubble as well. I mean, we spend hours working on these pieces. You get just so intimately involved with the characters of your story. How has it been for you this entire year? I know you also dealt with COVID. You're here in South Florida. This was obviously a hot spot. Tell us about that.
Sure, that was an interesting ride, having COVID and interviewing people about COVID, with COVID everything.
Yeah.
That was definitely, I mean, I had a fever. I remember interviewing someone with a fever. I remember just being so sick. I went to the hospital twice. I was having a hard time breathing. But I really believe my experience allowed me to connect more with the people that I was interviewing. And it really, you know, I remember a conversation I had that said, the person was coughing, and I said, I hear you. I am sick too. Yeah. So I really believe that there was a wall that was broken with that experience, as horrible as it was. And it really allowed me to ask better questions, to be honest. You know, anything from PPE to, you know, CDC guidelines. I think because I was so interested in, I mean, everyone was, but because I was a victim of it myself, I was able to dive deep and say, well, that's what the CDC is saying. I was actually actively studying it. So it really positioned me to tell these stories quite successfully in that sense.
And Monique had mentioned that some of the detainees were able to hear your reports on WLRN and other sources. But for the folks stuck on the ships, they didn't have newspaper delivery. Some of them didn't have Wi-Fi, but you guys kind of came to the rescue with this newsletter idea. What made you guys think of delivering news to these folks who were stuck in their rooms?
Yeah, the real motivation was just this lack of information for them. They really just craved wanting to know what was happening to the industry. And so they communicate mostly on WhatsApp. So we said, let's meet them where they're at. And we just started sending alerts to a big group of people that sources I had built over time. And it became a really good way. They started responding, sending documents, sending recordings, sending videos. And that was really helpful. I mean, one of the things that came from that was crew members started sharing that Royal Caribbean was telling them that the CDC had banned repatriation flights from the U.S., which wasn't true. The CDC said, you can fly people home, you just have to fly them on private transportation.
So they were just lying?
Yeah, they were lying. And so, as soon as we were able to publish that story, get that information to crew members, they were able to better advocate for themselves. And eventually, the Royal Caribbean executives signed an agreement with the CDC to start flying crew members home from the U.S. But it took, that public pressure, and it took really arming these crew members with the right information so they could go to the company and say, no, the CDC says we can go home.
I could talk to you ladies all day, but we have so many questions from our amazing audience members, and it's right on par with what we were just talking about. Someone asked on social media for you, Taylor, why WhatsApp? I find it ironic that WhatsApp was used as the way to link to the outside world when this platform is one of the main contributors of fake news. What are your thoughts to that? Yeah,
I think fake news can spread really like wildfire on Facebook, on WhatsApp, on any social media. We were really using it as a way to. We knew crew members were already using it. Yeah. It wouldn't be. They're not subscribers to the Miami Herald. They're not going to the homepage. They're not reading it there. They're on WhatsApp, and so we felt confident that if we could meet them where they're at and get them the information that way. I mean, the information we were providing was reliable. If they shared it elsewhere, it was going to be solid. So we felt confident that that was the right move, yeah.
All right, another question from our audience. What was the aha moment for both of you in these investigations? Please describe that moment.
There was one moment during one of my series where I was seeing this really big discrepancy with the numbers and the anecdotes I was hearing and what ICE was actually telling me. And it was at the very beginning of the pandemic when they told me that there were no cases of COVID-19 at the facility. And I was like, that's not true.
Yeah.
There are cases, there's one case in specific. I knew about one case, and the aha moment was the figuring out that they weren't counting it because they had transported that person to the hospital, and they weren't counting it in their numbers on. And that's why when I'm reporting on the cases of COVID-19 within the facilities, I'm very clear to say reported number of cases, because there are plenty more that just don't make it into the count because they get transferred out to local hospitals, et cetera. So that was a really big deal. The government got really upset with that, but it was important, especially when detainees were going missing.
And for you?
I think it was a moment I just described, was when I found out this Royal Caribbean was lying in this way. They had crew members had shared, handouts, documents the company had given them that just said CDC has banned repatriation. And so once I was able to get CDC to confirm what the process actually was, and really help these people. I mean, I think they would have been stuck for much longer had they not known. That was really gratifying and really, they immediately turned around the company and started getting people off, and that was really rewarding.
All right, another question. As an investigative journalist, are you ever worried about the risk? Are you ever worried about sticking your nose in too far?
No.
No. Fearless women. I love that. I love that. I love that. That is why you're being honored here today. All right, let's move along. Okay, this one is for Monique. Do you still have any contact with the people that you interviewed?
I do. Yes, it depends which ones, but most of them, not all 400 of them, but if you see their names in a story and enough to be quoted, chances are I'm still in contact with them, yes.
Abuelo, he is now homeless, or could you explain kind of what's happening there?
Yes, I spoke to him just yesterday. He is still homeless. It's part of the problem I'm trying to describe in the series of stories. Yeah. He was released. It was supposed to be the best day of his life, he told me, but then he found himself at Camilla's house, quite homeless. And it's a systemic issue where there are no alternatives to detention for people with mental illness, people who have these issues of not being able to be accepted or to be deported. In his case, he wishes he could have been deported, but now without sharing too much, because that's part 3 of the series, but he is looking to reunite with his daughter out of state and get to live his final days.
And Taylor, I haven't had a chance to ask this of you. What are some of the bigger takeaways that you have from the story that you covered?
Yeah, I think
or your call to action, I guess.
Yeah, I think I would just urge people to really think about these workers when they get on a cruise ship. I think, cruise companies provide a really incredible value and a really incredible experience. But they certainly during this pandemic could have done things differently to really prioritize the well-being of these workers. And so I just would urge people to think about that and consider what life is like for them.
With your series of stories, obviously, for anyone who's taken a cruise, there's a lot of crew members who are from other countries. But you highlighted an entertainer who was an American, who also had a hard time trying to get back home. And she had the confidence and was willing to talk with you and share her stories and her mental health. Can you speak a little bit to that? Because obviously, I feel like her story really helped to crack open the door as well, because she was able to speak out of no fear compared to some of the other crew members there. Yeah,
and she originally was really nervous about going to the media, and I think just got so desperate to get off the ship. I actually first got in touch with her when the ship was in Port Miami, and they were holding it there, saying, "We're going to let you off, we're going to let you off," and then didn't. And it's hard to describe the devastation. I mean, she was just in such a dark place at that point and just really needed to be with her family and off the ship. But yeah, she was able to be very candid and really move the story forward.
Ladies, thank you so much for your amazing work and congratulations on your first place award.
Thank you so much.
All right. Again, we'd like to thank our first place winners again for their courageous work that really changed the lives of so many. You've proved to be a voice for people who are in really dangerous situations. You spoke up. Your dedication to your community is clear through this grueling research and innovation that you require to tell these stories. So thanks so much for all the work that you guys have done.
Thanks for having us.
All right. All right, we want to take this time to recognize someone who has been really influential in our South Florida community, Ron Esserman. Ron, who passed away last year, is remembered by his family and neighbors as optimistic, ambitious, generous, and a pillar of the South Florida community. His dedication to his life, the betterment of South Florida, was seen through the Miami Metro Zoo, the Ballet, the Performing Arts Center, and lasting businesses that he built around the area. Ron and his wife, Charlene, and his 4 children established a collaboration with the Knights Foundation, the Esserman Knight Awards, to honor and support local journalism, which we are carrying on today. The Esserman family and the Knight Foundations are proud to honor journalists whose work galvanizes us to make our community better. All award winners have shown such remarkable service towards the South Florida community. They took risk and worked meticulously and exhaustively to research and report on those untold stories. And as the night comes to a close, we are left with stories that deeply resonate and continue to make a positive impact in so many lives. And remember, we will be accepting applications and nominations for the next year, so keep your eye out for local journalists who you think should be honored for their public service work. A free press is essential to our democracy, and we will continue to honor and value that. Thank you for watching Stories from the Front Lines of Local Journalism. Here's to a stronger, healthier, and more informed community. And for all of you watching, we wish you a good night.